Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
All right, so introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about what you do.
So, I'm Elizabeth Lotardo. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor, an employee engagement consultant, and the author of the book, Leading Yourself. And I help people find more meaning and joy in the jobs that they already have, even if those jobs are not their dream jobs.
Love that. And what were you doing before that kind of led you to this work?
So, like a lot of writers, I started out in advertising and I found my experience to be really transactional. And I made my way into internal comms from advertising. I went back to school to study organizational psychology. And now I say I use my powers of persuasion for good.
I love that. Okay, so you wrote a book called Leading Yourself, which
Yeah.
really focuses on self-leadership as a core career skill. What inspired you to write this book? Was it something that you were seeing in your work with clients or you personally? I love the concept, but I'm just curious, like when you were like, what was the light bulb that went off saying people need this book?
There wasn't really a light bulb. It was more like a dim up. Like it started to become louder and louder and louder. So I first started talking about leading yourself in 2017 on LinkedIn Learning, and I made a course called Leading Yourself. And it did well. And then when 2020 hit, it exploded. When everybody or a lot of office workers went home, your manager wasn't right there, there wasn't the clear direction and camaraderie you were used to, self-leadership became more important. And now it's taken center stage. So, 8 years after first talking about it and studying it, I decided to write a book on it because in 2025, we're up against some rapid change. Your boss is busy. They do not have time to be cheerleader, handholder, all of these things. And you're going to have a lot of different jobs, a lot of different careers, the data would suggest over the course of your life. And the only common denominator is you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. People who've listened to the show for a while probably feel the sense of you and I are on the same wavelength with that. I think especially now what I'm realizing too, as someone who's been a manager, an individual contributor, someone who's been more junior and really answered to people, it's like the people who do the best at work too are the ones who are easy to work with because they're not putting all that pressure on a manager or someone else to lead them to figure it out for them. And I feel like there's this sense I just came back from a conference and when you're on an expo hall and all this stuff and it's like your live events, things are going wrong. And you're kind of like, who does best in this world are people who can adapt and change and because nothing goes perfectly according to plan, right? Like there's a plan on paper, and then you go to the conference and you put your event up and you're like, where are the scissors? They sent us stickers instead of magnets or whatever the thing is. And it just makes me think of like this career skill of like to your point being able to lead yourself or figure it out, right?
Absolutely. And as we think about AI evolving, it's so quickly automating just basic punch list tasks and the human skills of problem solving and
Yeah.
pivoting and being able to self-lead, that is what is valuable.
Yeah, it's like it's emphasizing more like your ability to be a creative problem solver when you're not given all the answers versus because you're right, AI will be able to help you with the easy stuff. Okay, so in your book, you really highlight these four key practices of self leaders. Can you give us a quick overview of what those are?
Yep. So in my research, I identified four mindsets that are the core of leading yourself, and they're being able to find meaning in sometimes mundane circumstances, training your brain to avoid mental ruts, acting in the face of fear, and tolerating uncertainty. And what I found is that those four abilities start a flywheel and they radiate into everything from giving feedback to managing your one-on-ones to working with your peers to prioritizing. They sit beneath that in every single element.
Okay, I love all these, especially the mundane tasks and getting in a rut because I think those are the ones where people are automatically go, my work isn't interesting. I need to go find another job. And it's like, but you take yourself wherever you go. And to your point, these are a mindset that you take wherever you go. So can you go a little deeper into each of these and like maybe provide an example? And then like, what do we do to combat this?
So let's start with finding meaning in the mundane. There's no shortage of people talking about purpose at work, right?
Yeah.
These big mission statements, vision statements. There's the Ikigai graphic on LinkedIn where all the
Yep.
circles come together, and no one really has that experience. We all have boring parts of our job, but being able to find those kind of mundane elements meaningful is a core skill because it radiates out into more creative thinking, problem solving, innovation, and engagement. So if you're feeling like, oh, my work is not that meaningful, what you can do is explore the ripple effect of your task. Where are your emails going? Who are they going to? How is it making a difference to them? You can get feedback from your colleagues, your boss, your customers. Feed that narrative to your brain of, hey, this actually matters. When we see it as meaningless, we don't do a good job and we also feel really bored and bad doing it.
Yeah, I like a smile file for those reasons too. Like keeping a file of your accomplishments or what you're working on because I think it helps you or reminds you like what you're doing matters or how it matters. But yes, if you can connect the dots to the impact you're making, certainly it's much more motivating, right? To stick with it.
Definitely. So let's talk about training your brain to avoid mental ruts. I think this is something, even though I wrote the book, me too, we all experience right now. A mental rut can be challenging because the more it goes on, the deeper it becomes and the harder it is to break out of. It's almost like if you're pushing a wheelbarrow through the dirt, the more times you take the same path, like that wheelbarrow is just pulled into the groove. So you have to be proactive in breaking out of this mental rut. It doesn't happen by accident. And to do that, you need to give your brain something to latch onto instead of being like, well, I'm not going to be depressed anymore. You have to have the counter thought. Like if you're trying to quit smoking, you have the gum. If you're taking out a support beam in your house, you're building it up in other areas. So giving your brain a positive thought that you are going to, even if it's with an eye roll, repeat to yourself when you see that first sign of the rut can make such a significant difference in your own emotional engagement over time. So if your mental rut is, my job is boring and uninteresting, your counter thought can be, I'm going to find opportunities to connect with new people in this job. I'm going to bring my uniquely human skills to the floor in different ways. And again, even if you only half believe it, forcing your brain to articulate that support thought at the very first sign of a mental rut does make an impact.
I can totally see that. Like maybe you have to write it down or put it somewhere visually where you can see it to remind yourself, but I can totally see how remind yourself sort of like why you're doing or what's in it or, the bigger picture certainly is helpful in those moments.
So let's go to number three, acting in the face of fear. This one can be really challenging because primally we do not like fear, like as a species, and our brains have not evolved enough to differentiate between I'm going to get eaten by a bear and I might get laid off. Like to our primal brain, those two are the same. And
Makes
that can be
sense.
frustrating at work because running away from a bear is effective and burying your head in the sand and running away when you're about to get laid off is not. So you have to be able to act in the face of fear. And a trick you can play on your brain to enable your strategic thinking to actually work when you're afraid is to articulate the upside. And here's what I mean. Your brain is fear-based. It latches on to the risk, the downside. I'm going to get laid off. It's all going to be terrible. I'm never going to find another job. The market's awful. Ugh. What is the possible upside if that were to happen? Maybe there's a better job out there for you. Maybe there will be a restructure, but you'll be promoted through it somehow. Maybe you'll be put in a different role and meet new people that build you, new opportunities. You have to point your brain to look at this potentially optimistic alternative. You're not denying the very real threat, but when you can focus on a potential upside, even if it never comes to fruition, in the moment, you're better for it.
I love that. I love the positive spin. I think, hope is an important ingredient in all things. So,
It
okay, with that,
isn't.
oh, sorry, go on.
I was gonna say it is, and it's in such short supply now.
Yes, especially you go on LinkedIn or social media, it just sometimes it feels like they show you all the bad stuff first, and you're like, maybe I wish I could change the algorithm to be like, show me the positive things, but that's not how social media keeps us on there for a long time, right? Okay, so was that the fourth one?
The fourth one is tolerate uncertainty. So we did act in the face of fear, tolerate uncertainty. They're pretty closely connected. All of us are experiencing some level of uncertainty in our jobs, in our careers, in our organizations, and that uncertainty can make it hard to do anything because your brain wants everything to be settled
Yeah.
before it makes a decision. So, one hack that I learned to help with this is something I learned from a woman named Tessa Romero, and it's the brain hack called This Is My Chance. And those four words can pivot your mind. And the way you use this is if you are confronted with some type of uncertainty, some type of change, like, oh, I don't know if this product is going to work out. It's all up in the air right now. You prompt your brain with, this is my chance. This is my chance to build relationships in a tough moment. This is my chance to examine some potential downsides I missed earlier. This is my chance to get out ahead of a failure if there is one on the horizon. Those four words take your brain from anxiety into action. They prompt you to step into the moment in a way you otherwise may not have.
Which is so important because I feel like when you are anxious, one of the best things you can do is start taking action because the little stuff sort of, calms your brain. And I think part of the anxiety is like you're not taking action, right? You feel calmer when you are at least doing something.
All four of these mental abilities are oriented around breaking the cycle, right? We get into this cycle of work is meaningless. I'm in this big mental rut. I'm afraid of the future. There's so much I don't know. All four of these are rewriting that belief. And we know that when you do it, the payoff is huge for you and your organization.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things maybe I could see people struggling with when they listen to this episode is like, well, I struggle with self-leadership because I'm not, quote, a leader. No one has tapped me on the shoulder and said, you're in charge of leading or a manager. How do you define self-leadership and why do you think it's important for everyone, regardless of their role?
That's a great question. To me, self leadership is owning your seat. Whatever seat you're in, whatever levers you can pull, you are taking full ownership of that. And you are always in charge of yourself, even if you do have a manager. And I think culturally, the narrative hasn't done us really any favors around leadership lately. We place so much emphasis on our managers to be purpose
Yeah.
driven and empathetic and so robust and perfect at giving feedback and available and career coaches. And that's a whole lot of things for a person who is leading tons of other people and has their own deliverables. So even if you are not a manager of people, you are always a manager of yourself. And being a self leader is not of sabotage to your manager, it is of service to your manager.
Oh my gosh. I think every manager listening to this is like, I'm so happy you said that because I need more people to become self-leaders to help so that I can manage them more effectively. Does that make sense? It's almost like you get a better manager when you are stepping into that self-leadership role.
Absolutely. Your manager does not want to be handholding you. Trust me. When you are able to own the seat you're in, to move from reactive to proactive, to surface opportunities, ask strategic questions, do some of that mental labor, your relationship with your manager gets so much better.
Yeah, I can think of like many people in my life that need to read your book and do this work. Mostly because it's a little too much like I'm waiting for permission to do this thing. And I think what happens is you're waiting for a manager or somebody to come and tap you on the shoulder to do this. And it's like it's never going to happen like that. And so to your point, you are personally missing so many opportunities when you do not take step into this spot. The other thing I could see people kind of pushing back on is that they often struggle because of these external pressures, right? It's hard
Mhm.
to stay motivated and accountable without the external pressure of maybe a manager checking in on you. So, how can self leaders build habits that support long term growth and resilience when this is very much an internal job that they're doing?
So you mentioned earlier that hope is in short supply. Joy is also in short supply. And one of the big reasons we struggle with long-term motivation is we define our goals based on what is the most strategic thing possible and completely ignore the fact that we're going to need energy and motivation to do this in the first place. So if your goals are devoid of anything that is meaningful or joyful to you, you're going to have a really hard time. That said, you work for an organization likely, and someone tells you what your goal is, and you don't get to unilaterally control goals based on what gives you the most joy. You can still infuse elements of meaning and joy into the goals you're given, and it's important because that's going to play a factor in your long-term motivation. So having those benchmarks of when I hit this milestone, I'm going to go get lunch with one of my friends and talk about how excited I am. When I launch this first beta version, I'm going to source some customer feedback from customers I have a good relationship with to kind of fuel my cup. Paying attention to your own energy through that is a predictor of how likely you are to meet the goal, not some like strategic matrix on prioritization.
Yeah, it's not part of your OKRs that
Right.
you're sharing with your manager. So, just to put this like tangibly into action, would you set your OKR and then like maybe just internally kind of have these small benchmarks like when I finish that big project, I'm gonna go get a manicure. When I finally launch that site relaunch that I've been working on. I'm going to do X. Like, would you write them down? Do you just sort of know them? I mean, how do you work this joy into kind of like your daily or weekly routine?
It certainly won't happen by accident. So you do need to be proactive. And one of those ways is to write them down. In reference to OKRs, I think there's a really important distinction between what an OKR is, which is generally an output you're set to achieve that depends on a lot of other people in most cases, even though no one wants to admit that. Where we know we get energy is when we focus on the inputs, all the behaviors and things you can do to drastically increase the likelihood that you are going to hit that OKR. Because trying your best and crossing your fingers feels really anxiety inducing. Zooming in on what is in your control, those micro behaviors, charting them out, making sure you got some boost in between them, that makes a significant difference on whether you do or don't hit the number.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned micro behaviors, also something I absolutely love. So, what are some small actionable steps or micro behaviors that any professional can take today to start leading themselves more effectively?
The best thing you can do to lead yourself effectively is to ingrain the default response of what part of this do I own? And the tendency is say, well, that's so and so's fault. That's my manager's responsibility. That was a competitor. I didn't have to do that. When you can embrace radical accountability in every situation that's frustrating you and say, what part of this do I own? Even if it's only your own mindset, you give yourself permission to change the circumstances instead of hoping that they change for you.
Wow. This should be like a book club that every team does without pointing out, hey, everyone needs to do this more. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, everything you're saying is so smart and so what is needed to be successful at work. And sometimes I feel like people overcomplicate it. And to your point, it's like if you defaulted to radical accountability, that could change everything, right? Versus the, oh, four other people looked at this and they didn't catch it. And so I'm going to spend a day spiraling over this mistake that, quote, I made, but it really wasn't my fault. It's like, let's just take radical accountability for it and move on to the next thing, right?
It's so much more efficient. And you know, I'll tell you, I get that feedback a lot that I think other people should read this book. I've had so many managers say to me, I want to give your whole book to my team. But how should I preface it? Because
Yeah.
I don't want them to be insulted.
I don't think it's an insult. I honestly feel like if you're giving this book to people, it's your way of saying, like, here's an opportunity or like you have what it takes to be a self leader. And that's like in my opinion, a really big compliment that someone sees that in you. And they're essentially giving you permission if maybe you felt like you couldn't, like, yes, I want you to step in. Sometimes I think, well, we should talk about managers and leaders because a lot of us have, mentors or managers, people who influence our careers. And I'm curious, how does self leadership complement or even enhance that external leadership, or vice versa? How could it maybe hurt that?
I couldn't agree more with your sentiment that it's a compliment. Like to hand someone a book called Leading Yourself is saying, I believe in you and you
Right.
have what you need to do this. I think a lot of people are worried about saying, I don't want to be an uninvolved manager, and that's certainly not the case. So let's talk about how these connect. With your manager, you mentioned this is going to improve your relationship with your manager a lot. Managers want people who are empowered, who are self starters, who identify things, are proactive, instead of someone who shows up to the one on one like, oh, I don't know. What questions do you have for me? That is a completely different dynamic. You can elevate your status in the eyes of your manager and your whole organization through self leadership. Mentors appreciate this too, because to your earlier point, this saves a lot of time. When you put the mental effort into preparing for these conversations and identifying the most important elements to discuss, everyone experiences a more enjoyable
Right.
conversation and the outcome is more effective. And when you are a leader, self leadership is still important because you're modeling to your team, like, I am an empowered person. I set the tone, I set the direction instead of complaining, oh, it was my boss, it was a C suite. Oh, yeah, sorry, there's nothing I can do. That doesn't create a great culture for your team, even if it feels good in the moment. When you can model creating a different work experience, your team has the permission to do the same, and that changes everything.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I feel like to your point, your team is more efficient. They're focused on the things that have the biggest impact so that your team together collectively gets to kind of raise the performance bar, and all of that is a really good thing, right? So it's not an insult for anybody who wants to recommend this to their book club at work. Okay, you work with organizations to help develop leadership at all levels. So how do companies benefit when employees embrace the self-leadership, and like what does it look like to sort of say, okay, we want this to be part of our culture, is like we are a culture of self-leaders.
So I'll tell you what prevents that from happening. I've been working as an employee engagement consultant for almost 10 years now, and I run into this really pervasive myth that employee engagement is the responsibility of a manager. And I think that myth is propelled for a couple of reasons. First, Gallup, number one name in employee engagement, the Gallup 12. If your organization takes an employee engagement assessment from Gallup and does poorly, the answer, quote, to fix every question you scored poorly on is manager training. The manager for all 12 questions is the problem, according to Gallup, which is not fair because those people are burnt out and tired leading teams that are too big. So that's one reason why we think employee engagement is manager's responsibility. This forefront organization kind of said so. The second reason is all over LinkedIn, we see things about, a great job and what it means to find a great job and how you can find a great job. We see a lot less on how you can create a great job, how you can make the job you already have better. And combined, this manager focus on employee engagement and the notion that you find a great job has contributed to individuals feeling really disempowered. And
Yeah.
that's a terrible feeling. And in my opinion, it's one that's not true. You are the biggest predictor of your work experience, no matter where you are, no matter who you work for. It is you. So if you're a manager sitting here and being like, I wish my employees would feel this way and own their roles, it can make a tremendous difference inside of your organization. And the first step is empowerment. When someone is not empowered, they cannot self lead. So, being able to raise hands in a culture of psychological safety, being able to ask questions openly, being able to accept radical accountability without fear of blame and shame, those things can move the needle on a culture of self leadership. But ultimately, I do believe the hands or the powers in the hands of each person to be
Yeah.
engaged instead of become engaged via someone else or some other factor.
Again, I think every manager is so happy you're saying this because they're like, we're burnt out. We have nothing left to give. Okay, one other thing that you and I really agree on is the myth of the dream job and instead the good enough job. So as we sort of wrap up, can we talk a little bit about that and your final thoughts on good enough jobs?
So I mentioned in 2020, my work really started to take off because of the pandemic, and that was at the time of the Great Resignation. It feels really different now.
Yeah,
But during the Great Resignation, a huge percentage of white collar workers left their jobs, and most of them reported a greater search for meaning and purpose and impact, and they just wanted to feel better at work. And what we know now, years later, is that the majority of those people are reporting they were better off at their old job. The majority of them said they left too quickly, their new job wasn't any better. So, what does that tell us? There is not a perfect job.
right.
Yes, some jobs are terrible and some bosses are abusive and you shouldn't work for them. Every job is imperfect to some degree. So holding your breath that every single star will align in terms of a great manager and a great salary and breakthrough products and an awesome economy, you're gonna be holding your breath for a long time. Instead, accepting that, hey, this job's gonna be good enough for now and
Yeah.
I can make it great for me. That's when you give yourself permission to step into a completely different career.
And what are some of the tips that help you take a good enough job and make it great for you? I completely agree with this. And I have lived these experiences 100%, so I know they're true, but I want to hear from you. How does someone do
Lessons learned the hard way for a lot of us, myself.
that? Yeah.
So first, find meaning in the mundane. That's where we started this conversation. Trace your ripple effect. Get feedback from customers and colleagues. Two, train your brain to avoid fear, uncertainty, all of these emotions. The more you can get out ahead of those, the more you're able to think creatively, be strategic, and form lasting relationships. Three, open to feedback. If you are not open to feedback, no one else will be open to your feedback. And because of that, no one's going to change. So the more you can model giving, receiving feedback well, the more likely you are to make a significant difference in your work experience. And four, adjust your expectations. Work is a great thing and can be really meaningful and fulfilling, but it can also just be one element of a whole fulfilling life. And when we tie our entire identity into what we do, we set ourselves up to not be resilient in the face of a setback or a change.
Yeah, it's like having this expectation hangover. You're right, you're like, but I kind of did this to myself, similar to other hangovers where you're like, I knew to manage it appropriately and maybe I didn't. And that's one of my issues with this dream job, not to mention the myth of like that they exist and that you can go and find them. And that's why it's a myth, you guys. So Elizabeth, this has been such an amazing conversation. Remind everyone the name of your book, where they can find it, follow you. You have LinkedIn courses, so tell us all the things. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
All the things. I have tons of LinkedIn learning courses. You can check me out at elizabethlotardo.com. I also put content out on LinkedIn just about every day. And my book, Leading Yourself, is everywhere you can buy books, Kindle, audio, all the things.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.